So let us chant our dedication. Nana Shastra Vicharanaika Nipano Sadharma Samstapako Lokanam Hitakarino Tribhuvane Manyo Sharanya Karo Radha Krishna Padaravinda Bhajana Nandena Mataliko Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghuyago Shri Jiva Gopalako Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghuyago Shri Jiva Gopalako. Adna Manuta. Oh. Actually, I could use some help here, my God. Struggling away. Oh. Okay, oh my gosh. All right. Sorry about that. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the 6 Goswamis, namely Sri Sanatan Goswami, Sri Rupa Goswami, Sri Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Sri Raghunath Das Goswami, Sri Jiva Goswami, and Sri Gopal Bhatta Goswami, who are very expert in scrutinizingly studying all the revealed scriptures with the aim of establishing eternal religious principles for the benefit of all human beings. Thus they're honored all over the 3 worlds, and they're worth taking shelter of, because they're absorbed in the mood of the gopis and are engaged in the transcendental loving service of Radha and Krishna. Okay, hope the sound's all right there, on Facebook particularly. So, devotees, Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadeshatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. Yes, so devotees, now we've finished the introductory section of Nectar of Devotion, which was the introduction and chapter 1. And now we are moving on to the second section of 4 in the eastern side, at least, of Nectar of Devotion. And that is discussing sadhana bhakti. Sadhana bhakti. So, yes, chapter 2, the first stages of devotion. And we assume that we will spend 2 evenings on the second chapter. There's a fair amount to cover. So let us just dive straight in then. So yes, here in this chapter 2, the first section of chapter 2 is an introduction and it's the first 4 paragraphs. Let us just go through these. In the first paragraph, Srila Prabhupada points out that, well, he refers back, really. He refers back to the previous chapter in which the 6 characteristics of pure devotional service were listed out and then described, and then they were divided into 3 groups. Two of those 6 characteristics manifest on the level of sadhana bhakti, the second 2 on the level of bhava bhakti, and the third set of 2 on the level of prema bhakti. So again here, in the first paragraph, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Rupa Goswami have just referred to these things again. Yes, devotional service in practice. Practice is the literal translation of the word sadhana. Sadhana translates as practice. So here you see in the first paragraph, Prabhupada says that in the category of devotional service and practice, there are 2 different qualities. Then devotional service in ecstasy means bhava bhakti, has 4, means the 2 from sadhana bhakti plus 2 more, which are not in sadhana bhakti, but they manifest on the level of bhava. And then devotional service in pure love of Godhead has 6 qualities, the first 4 and then 2 more. So these qualities will be explained by Srila Rupa Goswami later on. I don't know about that. Really, they've already been discussed, at least to some degree. I think, fairly elaborately. So let's go on to the second paragraph. And here Prabhupada's introducing the idea of eligibility. Who may take to Krishna consciousness? Of course, that is specifically the subject of the 3rd chapter, which we'll be coming to in due course, we assume, on Monday. But there's some mention, at least in the 2nd paragraph, that it depends on your taste or your tendency to become attracted. This is the sense of eligibility. And Prabhupada explains there that you're not really going to have a taste if you're not already a devotee in this lifetime. Then you're not really going to have a taste or an attraction for it, for Krishna consciousness, unless in your previous lifetime, you at least had some connection, or you were engaged in Krishna consciousness. The likelihood is not great. The likelihood is not great. But be that as it may, Prabhupada goes through the point from Bhagavad Gita chapter 2 verse 40, if you're familiar with that, Neha Bikrama Nashosti Pratyavayana Vichate Swalpamapyasya Dharmasya Trayate Mahato Bhayat, that any progress you make at any point in Krishna consciousness is not lost. So your progress from your previous lifetime, now you've come to this lifetime, that progress is not lost also. So in this way, it provides a type of impetus to take up Krishna consciousness again and go into, as the chapter title says, the first stages of devotion. But Prabhupada then at the end of the second paragraph makes an important point, that even if there is no continuity, somehow or other, you didn't do devotional service previously, and just somehow, Prabhupada even says, if only by chance, you become attracted to the instructions of a pure devotee, instructions of Krishna, then you can be accepted as a candidate for Krishna consciousness, and you can make progress. But whatever, either this way or that way, whether something from your previous life or not, Prabhupada says, anyway, for persons who have a natural taste for understanding books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, devotional service is easier than for those who are simply accustomed to mental speculation and argumentative processes. In this regard, let us just refer, this is a special little aside I've been asked to mention, that about getting a taste for hearing Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Hare Krishna, and so on. We can just refer to Srimad Bhagavatam 1-18, Nashta Prayeshva Bhadreshu, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, Bhagavati Uttama Shloke, Bhakti Bhavati Naishtake. By regular attendance in classes on Bhagavatam and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who's praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. So this is a very relevant verse in this regard, very relevant, and I suspect you may be asked a question about it. Just take it from me, all right? I suspect you're going to be asked a question about that, so note it. Otherwise, let's move on. Let's move on to the next paragraph. And, well, Prabhupada just makes the point that we're not interested in mental speculation. We, there are many authoritative assertions, statements by learned scholars of bygone ages. So we're interested in those statements for coming to devotional service and to situate us in the first stages of devotion. Okay. That's the third paragraph. Sorry, there's only 3 paragraphs actually. Well, 4 if we say that when the paragraph is divided going from one page to another, then it becomes 4 paragraphs. So, okay, now we go on to, we are now on what? We're on page 21 of our PDF. And if we, let's say, if we take it that the paragraph beginning, here is a general description of devotional service. Just because I've divided up my notes in this way, let's take it like that. This is now paragraph 5, if you don't mind. So let me just read that little bit there. Here is a general description of devotional service given by Sri Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Previously, it's been stated that devotional service can be divided into three categories: devotional service and practice in ecstasy and in pure love of God. Now, Sri Rupa Goswami proposes to describe devotional service in practice. Okay, so sadhana bhakti. And just remember, this word practice translates as sadhana in Sanskrit, and we will be coming across that term quite regularly. All right, so we go on to the next paragraph. Practice means employing our senses. Okay, so practice means employing our senses in some particular type of work. So in other words, we have to utilize our different sensory organs in devotional service to Krishna. Here we are now. You are using your ears. Some of you are taking notes. You're using your hands. And I'm saying some things. And we're all thinking about this and that. So at least these of our sensory functions, right at this very moment, we're engaging in devotional service. And so let's see. So we're still in that paragraph. So practice means employing both the mind and the senses in practical devotional service. It's not for developing something artificial. For example, a child learns or practices to walk. And then Prabhupada actually, having introduced this idea of the child learning to walk as being a type of example of development through practice, like sadhana, Prabhupada continues the point in the next paragraph. This walking is not unnatural. The walking capacity is there originally in the child, and simply by a little practice he walks very nicely. And similarly, devotional service is the natural instinct of every living entity. Let's say a few words about that, because it's an important point. That we have all learned how to walk. Other than someone who's physically handicapped, everybody learns how to walk in their just early childhood, when they're really small. And the you could say the possibility, how that is possible, is because it's part of the human condition to walk. And when we're talking about this example, sometimes we give the example of flying. It is not part of the human condition to fly. Therefore, if we try to fly, means not in aeroplanes, but just as is, as we are. If we try to learn how to fly, we are going to encounter some very serious problems. And we may die. I've mentioned before that I saw one time, some years ago, I should have watched the whole thing, but just a few minutes of some presentation on the history of flight. And according to them, the first recorded example of someone trying to fly was some fellow, I can't remember his name at all, but some Englishman, trust the Englishman, but anyway. And you know what he did? He climbed up a building to about the 4th floor or 5th floor. They didn't have buildings much bigger than that. I mean, this is like 300 years ago. It's not the Wright brothers' time. This is way back, a good couple of 100 years ago. So he climbed up maybe 4 floors, and he had made some wing type things, which he'd attached firmly to his arms, and he jumped and flapped and crashed. I shouldn't laugh, should I? It's not nice. But he survived. But he got damaged. There were broken bones, and it was not a nice situation. But then they said he tried again. Sometime later he tried again and was just as unsuccessful. He sort of re-strategized the wings. So the point is that to walk is a natural part of the human condition. To fly, unless you make some massively unnatural arrangement like building aeroplanes, but then, you're not actually yourself flying as such. But other than that, human beings can't come anywhere near to flying. And it doesn't really matter how many years you practice. You will get after 20 years of practice, you will be no closer to flying than on the first day you tried, because it is not part of the human condition. Now, in regard to devotional service, where we read the first little sentence there, similarly, devotional service to the Supreme Lord is the natural instinct of every living entity. And Prabhupada makes the point, even uncivilized people, they have some type of religious activity, at least something. We've mentioned before that in some countries, people like, materially not advanced people, in some places they worship the sun because they're afraid that if they don't, it will not come back the next day, the next morning. But so they do some sort of religious program, some sort of worship of the sun, and then lo and behold, the sun rises again in the morning, and the people think, just see, our religion works. It works, it's real, because the sun came back again. So this consciousness, Prabhupada says in the same paragraph, although lying dormant in those who are materially contaminated, excuse me, is found in every living entity. And when purified, this is called Krishna Consciousness. Okay. So now we're almost at the bottom of page 21 in our PDF. It's the last full paragraph before the bottom of page 21. And it's actually quite an important paragraph. Yes. So, again, Prabhupada revisits this subject of the child walking and how natural it is and how it corresponds, at least in a certain sense in principle, with the arising of our Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada makes the point that in terms of that awakening, of that otherwise innate natural, built-in tendency to serve God, just like it's built into the child. So and a child, if a child is trained nicely, then the child will start walking quicker. If the child's encouraged and facilitated. So similarly, our tendency to devotional service is there within our hearts already, and actually in the heart of every living entity. But it needs to be encouraged. Otherwise, well, look at so many people, look at ourselves perhaps. So many lifetimes we've been in this material world, and that natural tendency was there within our hearts, but it didn't start coming out. But now we've had some association with devotees, as Prabhupada mentioned in the very first paragraph. And now there are certain prescribed methods. There's a whole program which will help us, which will facilitate the natural manifestation more and more of that tendency which is already there within our hearts to serve Krishna. And again, like I said, Prabhupada refers to walking. So similarly, Prabhupada says, Krishna consciousness cannot be aroused simply by practice. Actually, there is no such practice. But when we wish to develop our innate capacity for devotional service, there are certain processes which, by our accepting and executing them, will cause that dormant capacity to be invoked. Such practice is called sadhana bhakti. Okay. And there is a verse. There's a verse which appears in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and which you may or may not have a copy of, but it also appears in Chaitanya Charitamrita. And I'm going to give you the verse number, not because, as far as I know, you have to learn it, but just because it's a very important verse and it's a very nice verse. It is actually Lord Chaitanya defining what is sadhana bhakti to Sanatana Goswami in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Leela, chapter 22, verse 105. Kriti Sajya Bhavet Sajya Bhavasa Sadhanabhida Nitya Siddhasya Bhavasya Prakatyam Hridi Sajyata. When transcendental devotional service by which love for Krishna is attained is executed by the senses, it is called sadhana bhakti, or the regulative discharge of devotional service. Such devotion eternally exists within the heart of every living entity. The awakening of this eternal devotion is the potentiality of devotional service in practice, or sadhana bhakti. Potentiality, it's a rather unusual term. It just means that the fact that Krishna consciousness is already there within the heart, because of that, we have potential for becoming Krishna conscious. If it wasn't in the heart, we wouldn't have potential for becoming Krishna conscious, just as the tendency to fly, or the ability to fly, is not in the heart, and therefore there's no potential. It has never, and we assume it will never manifest in a human being. Aha, okay. So then we go on to the next paragraph, which is, where is it? It's right at the bottom of page 21, and it crosses over into page 22. Yeah. And there, Prabhupada makes the point, without going through all the details, Prabhupada makes the point that right now we are in an abnormal condition of madness. Yeah. You know, first thing is, we all think we are these bodies, but we are not. Actually, we are all eternal persons. And someone sitting here in a male body right now, in Goloka Vrindavan, or in their actual natural spiritual state, in reality, they're as eternal persons, their swarup. Someone who's sitting here with a male body, in that original natural state, might be female, or even in another species. These things are possible. So in other words, right now, we are really in abnormal conditions. And our real nature is to be blissful eternally, but now it's a struggle, it's a battle. Hare Krishna. Don't tell me, it's just a struggle. Oh boy, been there, done that. Because we got entangled in material life. Or as Prabhupada says here, vikarma. Basically means in this context, very undesirable activities. And therefore we must practice sadhana bhakti. And Prabhupada lists out a few things. Means to offer Mangal Arati. Means we should be there in Mangal Arati. Then to not do certain things. Means to offer obeisances to the spiritual master, follow other rules and regulations, which we're going to be coming across, in some days. Plenty, no shortage of rules and regulations. So these practices, this practice of sadhana bhakti will cure us of our madness. Yeah. As a man's mental disease is cured by the directions of a psychiatrist, so the sadhana bhakti cures the conditioned soul of his madness under the spell of Maya, material illusion. So we're on page 22 now, and there's just a couple of more things we'll mention from these two paragraphs. Paragraph 10, Prabhupada makes it clear, important point, that the spiritual master, it is the duty of the acharya, the spiritual master, to find the ways and means for the disciple to fix his mind on Krishna. That is the beginning of sadhana bhakti. In other words, particularly for the very beginning disciples, it's not exactly their duty to find some practical activity in Krishna consciousness. They should receive it through parampara. And then in the following paragraph, it's the second full paragraph on page 22 of our PDF, Prabhupada points out that Lord Chaitanya has given us a whole program based around chanting. Based around chanting. It's a whole program, and all the different elements which make up the program, they facilitate us fixing our minds on Krishna. All right, so now we're on page 22 in our PDF, and now we go to the third complete paragraph on page 22, which is it's the biggest paragraph on the page. And this is now another section where it's developing the whole idea, what is sadhana bhakti? So, sadhana bhakti is of two types. There's not just one thing called sadhana bhakti. So, the first part is called service according to regulative principles. One has to follow the different principles by the order of the spiritual master or on the strength of scripture, and you can't refuse, at least if you want to progress in Krishna consciousness, you can't refuse. And this is called Vaidhi, or regulated sadhana bhakti. In other words, this one of the two forms of sadhana bhakti is called Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. Sometimes it's just called Vaidhi bhakti. Sometimes it's just called sadhana bhakti. But the fact is that ideally, strictly speaking, the correct term is Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. Because, well, Vaidhi means rules and regulations. Someone, there's also Raganuga sadhana bhakti. We'll mention something about that in a few minutes, which is not really so connected with rules and regulations exactly. I mean, that's a bit of a subtle subject, but definitely not like Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. Vaidhi sadhana bhakti is just really lots of rules and regulations. And not every devotee, as they progress in devotional service, goes from Vaidhi sadhana bhakti to Raganuga sadhana bhakti before approaching perfection. Some devotees, and it may be a substantial number, they just continue on in Vaidhi sadhana bhakti until they approach perfection. Or, in other words, they come to the level of bhava, which is the beginning of perfection. And then when they come to the level of bhava, then to a very substantial extent, they continue on doing devotional service, but it's more like perfect devotional service now. It's not just practicing and learning. So now, on the level of bhava, they perform devotional service, perfect devotional service, according to rules and regulations. Yes. Yeah. So it's a very interesting and very important point to grasp about the development of devotional service. Not everyone goes through Raganuga sadhana and then comes to perfection, but however many devotees continue on in rules and regulations till they reach perfection, and in perfection they continue following rules and regulations. And this is why, for example, just one example, when at whatever point it was in the Ramayana, when Lord Ram embraced Hanuman, was that anyway, whenever it was, maybe when they got back to Ayodhya, I'm not exactly sure. But when Lord Ram, who is the Lord, he's the king, but he's not just the king, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When he embraced Hanuman, Hanuman really hesitated to sort of return the embrace because he felt embarrassed, because this is the Lord, and who am I compared to the Lord? I'm no one. So, he felt embarrassed that he shouldn't treat me like that. I'm not worthy. Because according to rules and regulations, juniors don't go around embracing seniors too much. I don't know how famous it is, but it's a known story about Jayananda Prabhu, who all of you probably have heard of. One time when Prabhupada flew into Los Angeles, anyway, somewhere on the West Coast, California, Jayananda Prabhu was there in the airport with a group of devotees, and Prabhupada came into the building and, into the public area, and Jayananda in ecstasy. And he was big, he was a big man, and Prabhupada was a small man. He really was a small, like 5'5" or 6, definitely shorter than average. And Jayananda was big and strongly built. Jayananda came up to Prabhupada and embraced him and picked him up and spun around and put him down. Haribol. And reportedly, Prabhupada said, one should not do like this with the spiritual master. Because rules and regulations, you don't do things like that. You bow down. Yeah. I'm sure he bowed down also. So Hanuman felt like that too. That, I should be bowing down. But, here I'm sort of obliged to embrace him back. And he felt very awkward. So, Vaidhi, rules and regulations. And, it's very, and Prabhupada says twice, he says, there can be no question of refusal. And then he says, one has to do it without argument. So, it really is a point. It really is a point that because we are habituated so much to material existence and so many wrong things, habituated to so many wrong things, we kind of have to relearn life. We definitely have to, in many ways, relearn how to do at least many things in our lives. And this is Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. And you just got to do it. Even if you don't feel like you want to do it, you really need to do it so that you can break out of those old bad habits as quickly as possible. There's a saying, I'm sure you've heard, old habits die hard. Old habits die hard, they really do. And if you don't mind, I'm sure many of you have heard this story, but I'll tell it again. Prabhupada was Prabhupada was sitting in the front row of first class in an airplane one time, flying, I imagine, intercontinentally. And they were playing a war movie, David Niven. Probably, I remember David Niven. You're probably too young. Anyway, he was in all the World War II movies. John Wayne was in the Westerns, so-called. David Niven was in the World War II movies. And Prabhupada was not watching the movie. but he's sitting in the front row. It's just like a few feet in front of him. It's difficult to completely avoid. So Prabhupada, there was David Niven going up the hill to attack the enemy who are up on top. And David Niven suddenly, he gets shot and he goes down. But he gets up. And again he starts going up the hill. But then again he's shot, he goes down. But he gets up again and goes up the hill. And Prabhupada's just sort of, looking at this. And then Prabhupada just drifted off. He fell asleep, dozed off for maybe 30 seconds or something like that. And then he woke up again, and there was David Niven going up the hill. And then he got shot again. But then he got up again, and away he went. And Prabhupada, in a very sort of blasé way, just like, who cares? Prabhupada said, not dead yet. So they say old soldiers die hard and old habits die hard. And therefore we really need to follow the rules and regulations as much as we're able. So, but then, we're still in the same paragraph. Prabhupada says, another part of sadhana bhakti is called Raganuga. Raganuga refers to the point at which, by following the regulative principles, in other words, you've got to go through the Vaidhi stage first anyway, particularly for people like us. So it refers to the point at which, by following the regulative principles, one becomes a little more attached to Krishna and executes devotional service out of natural love. For example, a person engaged in devotional service may be ordered to rise early in the morning and offer arti, which is a form of deity worship. In the beginning, by the order of his spiritual master, one rises early in the morning and offers arti. But then he develops real attachment. When he gets this attachment, he automatically tries to decorate the deity and prepare different kinds of dresses and thinks of different plans to execute devotional service. So, even though it is in the realm of practice, it is not in the realm of perfection. It's in the realm of practice, but still, this offering of loving service is spontaneous. So the practice of devotional service can therefore be divided into these two categories. Let me just make a point, a little further point about what is Raganuga sadhana bhakti. In relation to the very brief little statement Prabhupada has given us there, let us just say, in simple terms, there is more to it than that. There is more to it than just, not minding getting up early in the morning and even being happy to get up and engage in deity worship or whatever your service happens to be. There is more to Raganuga sadhana bhakti than that. And we are going to discuss that in chapter 15 and chapter 16. Yeah. Our connection is not the best. Getting interrupted. Okay. So now, so that was introducing sadhana bhakti. Two types of sadhana bhakti. Now, from this point until the end of the chapter is going to start, at least, a whole discussion on Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. Right from the next paragraph, right to the end of the chapter, it's basically all about Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. Let me just see what to do here. Shall I just begin a little? I think I'm going to begin a bit. Let's just start going into Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. So we're still on page 22, and we're in the last paragraph right at the bottom of the page that goes over onto page 23. And there is, in the paragraph right at the bottom of the page, there is a definition of Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. It's the translation of a verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita. The verse is Madhya Lila chapter 22, verse 109. I'll just read the translation that Prabhupada gives in Nectar of Devotion, but if you want to, you can look up, you can find that, the actual verse in Chaitanya Charitamrita. All right, so Prabhupada gives the translation there. When there is no attachment or no spontaneous loving service to the Lord, and one is engaged in the service of the Lord simply out of obedience to the order of the spiritual master, or in pursuance of the scriptures, such obligatory service is called Vaidhi Bhakti, or Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. Yeah. So then Prabhupada, same paragraph, just now starting to go over to the next page, 23. Prabhupada gives us two very important verses. Two, is it? Very important verses? Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. Prabhupada, just over at the top now of page 23, just in the last few lines of the paragraph from the page before, Prabhupada doesn't quote the verse, but he refers to Maharaj Parikshit met Shukadev Goswami just a week before his death, and the king was perplexed as to what should be done before he was to pass on. Many other sages also arrived there, but no one could give him the proper direction. So just for interest's sake, this is Srimad Bhagavatam 1:19-24. 1:19-24, in which Maharaj Parikshit asks, O trustworthy Brahmins, I now ask you about my immediate duty. Please, after proper deliberation, tell me of the unalloyed duty of everyone in all circumstances, and specifically of those who are just about to die. So this is sort of like, you can say, this is like a type of classic question. A classic question in relation to Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. Yeah. What are we going to do? What should we do in life? What is the unalloyed duty of everyone in all circumstances? And specifically or particularly for those who are about to die. You know, it's the answer, well, I'll tell you, the answer comes. In fact, the verse it's actually quoted at the beginning of the next paragraph. And it's like the classic response to this question. What should anyone do? What should everyone do? Not everyone should engage in Raganuga sadhana bhakti, that's for sure. Generally speaking, what should everyone do under all circumstances? Engage in Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. If at some point, you know, they come to Raganuga, that's wonderful. But definitely for the time being, it behooves everyone to take up Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. So, you know, it's all very sort of strategically presented like this. So that's like the classic question, what should everyone do? And here's the classic answer, which appears in the first full paragraph on page 23 of our PDF, which begins, Shukadev Goswami, however, gave this direction to him as follows. Well, I'm going to read the translation from the Bhagavatam. It's the same, but slightly different. Srimad Bhagavatam, 2nd Canto, Chapter 1, Verse 5. Tasmad Bharata Sarvatma, Bhagavan Ishvaro Hari, Shrotavya Kirtitavyascha, Smartavyas Chechata Bayam. O descendant of King Bharata, one who desires to be free from all miseries must hear about, glorify, and also remember the personality of Godhead, who is the Supersoul, the controller and the savior from all miseries. Prabhupada sort of paraphrases it, you could say. So in other words, the basic idea in Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, for anyone who's practicing or who may practice Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, the classic idea is it's based on hearing and chanting. It's based on hearing and chanting about Krishna and not about, as Prabhupada goes on to say in that paragraph there, not about the demigods or whoever, you know, famous human beings. Right. So the next paragraph, which is the second full paragraph on page 23, is basically, I would say, oops, I've got to, just a sec. We will be back in 1 minute. Okay. Okay, now we just wait for our translator. There's just one more important point I'm going to cover, and then we'll finish just like in 5 minutes, say. All right. So in the next paragraph, is kind of emphasizing and developing the same point, that if you want to be fearless, because Maharaj Parikshit, anyway, there was a real need for him to be fearless. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So there's a great need for people to become fearless. Parikshit Maharaj, there was a great need for him to become fearless. And for us, there's a great need to become fearless by engaging in hearing and chanting about Krishna. And if people, this paragraph and the next one, this paragraph which begins, so Shukadev Goswami has recommended. So in order to be fearless, one has to hear and chant and remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead by all means. Otherwise, Prabhupada says just a little further down the paragraph, others who are not into hearing and chanting about Krishna are always vanquished. Basically means destroyed. It means specifically that after getting the human form of life, they don't get out of the entanglement of birth and death. Even though they've got human bodies, they just fall down again into material existence. And that idea is continued in the following paragraph, which is the second to last paragraph on page 23 in our PDF file, that if a person doesn't become Krishna conscious, he'll be thrown into the cycle of birth and death, involving 8,400,000 species of life. So, like this, here's a little something which you may be questioned on if you're doing the Bhakti Shastri course. So listen to this. Listen to this. That you may well be asked a question about a very famous verse, Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila, chapter 19, verse 151. Brahmanda Brahmate Kona Bhagyavan Jeev, Guru Krishna Prasade Pai, Bhakti Lata Bij. According to their karma, all living entities are wandering throughout the entire universe. Some of them are being elevated to the upper planetary systems, and some are going down into the lower planetary systems. Out of many millions of wandering living entities, one who is very fortunate gets an opportunity to associate with a bona fide spiritual master by the grace of Krishna. By the mercy of both Krishna and the spiritual master, such a person receives the seed of the kripa of devotional service. This is Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 19, make a note of it, verse 151. Okay. And it's very relevant to all these things Prabhupada has been saying just in this last couple of paragraphs. Yeah. So please make a note of that. If you don't watch out, if you don't cultivate a remembrance of Krishna through cultivating hearing and chanting about Krishna, who knows where you may end up. But it's likely to not be a very desirable place, lost in the material world. So there you go, devotees. Let us finish here for tonight, and we will continue on tomorrow evening. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki